Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you all can make it. Welcome to the Gulf Coast Prairie Landscape Conservation Cooperative Lunchtime Webinar Series for March 2017. My name is Ben Kaler, and I'm the Science Coordinator for the Gulf Coast Prairie LCC. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that listening in that we're in auditorium mode, which means that everyone is muted at this time. We will unmute all of the lines after the presentation for open discussion. So if you want, jot down some notes or questions in anticipation of the open discussion, and feel free to put any questions you have during the presentation in the chat box underneath the attendees list. The Gulf Coast Prairie LCC is a collaborative science support partnership working to deliver sustainable natural cultural resource conservation in the Gulf Coast Prairie geography by sharing scientific knowledge, leveraging resources, and working towards common landscape goals. Our LCC chose 28 focal species that represent 17 broadly defined habitats in order to define and design long-term landscape conservation to achieve the mission of our partnership. In August 2014, the steering committee approved our LCC science strategy, which identified the most critical science needs for 6 of our focal species. And one of those top-tier focal species is Alligator Gar, and was chosen to represent several aquatic habitat types. Today, we're joined by Dr. David Hoinghaus from the University of North Texas in Denton, and Dr. Jennifer Jensen from Texas State University in San Marcos. In just a minute, they will give us an update on a multi-year project that seeks to identify potential alligator gar spawning areas in floodplain reaches of the lower Trinity River and model the amount and quality of inundated floodplain habitat during the spawning season to alligator gar recruitment. Before they take the floor, I just want to briefly introduce them. Dr. David Hoinghaus is an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and Advanced Environmental Research Institute at the University of North Texas. David's research focuses on fish population and aquatic community ecology with special interest in floodplain river systems and flow regimes. David earned a PhD in ecology, evolutionary biology, and systematics in 2006 from Texas A&M University. Dr. Jennifer Jensen is an associate professor in the Department of Geography at Texas State University. Jennifer's teaching and research focuses on implementing geospatial technologies, including remote sensing, GPS, and GIS, to address Earth system science questions with an emphasis on vegetation composition and structure in landscape ecology. Dr. Jensen earned her PhD in environmental science in 2009 from the University of Idaho. And there are 4 other folks who have been very influential and impactful in this research that are unfortunately unable to be with us as presenters today, although I know the presence of Yvonne Allen, Fish and Wildlife Service, is listening in, but Dr. Tom Hardy and Kirk Weinmiller, Dr. Allison Peace, and Yvonne Allen have all been played critical roles in the development and assessment of this project. So before we launch into the presentation, we have a quick poll for you all in the audience on the line today to give us a sense of how you categorize yourself, give us a sense of the group today. So if you would, please take a brief moment to select an option that best describes you. Okay, looking at some results here. Looks like we've got a nice blend of folks on the line. Unfortunately, no one's categorized themselves as a water manager, but many in the room, fisheries and aquatic managers, wildlife managers or planners, research scientists, and some state or federal land managers. So pretty good crew today. Thank you all for doing that. I appreciate having a better snapshot of the audience. I think it's going to be helpful for the presenters as well as we move into the discussion at the end. So thank you all. Without further ado, Dr. Hoinghaus and Dr. Jensen, we welcome you. You have control of the webinar and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ben, for the introduction and for the opportunity to provide an update of this project. We're looking forward to sharing some of the initial results, but also we're very excited to get some feedback and suggestions from those that are participating today in terms of developing this project further and moving forward. So the way Jen and I will present the webinar today is I'll provide an initial overview. She'll provide the bulk of the webinar in terms of the modeling efforts, and I'll close at the end. I'd just like to mention, as Ben did, that Tom Hardy, Kirk Miller, Allison Pease, and Yvonne Allen are also involved in this research. And unfortunately, they can't be here except for Yvonne participating. So without further ado, here we go. So the outline, like I said, I'll provide an overview, describe kind of the project goals, our study area. The big component that we'll cover today will be looking at stage-specific spawning habitat suitability models, and Jen will cover that. And then I'll come back on and talk a little bit about some of our field validation efforts, what's next, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So as Ben mentioned, and as many or all of you surely know, Alligator Gar is an iconic species native to lowland floodplain river systems such as the lower Trinity, which is our study area. They're ecologically and economically important, and they're just really interesting from the standpoint of being highly adapted for these types of systems, as you can see based on fossils. They really are living dinosaurs. However, they're severely impacted in much of their range, and primarily, or one of the major implications, or one of the major factors implicated in this decline is disruption of river floodplain connectivity, particularly as affecting successful reproduction and recruitment. So the objectives of this project is kind of looking forward to providing tools for successful management and conservation by understanding the relationship between flow and recruitment and focusing on the availability and suitability of off-channel habitats that might be utilized for reproduction. So goal of this project is to identify those types of spawning areas, where they're located in reaches of the lower Trinity River, how those vary in relation to river stage, and how they vary in time so that we can model Alligator Gar year class strength. So Alligator Gar is considered to be an extreme periodic life history strategist with boom and bust cycles of recruitment. So what factors contribute to those boom or really good recruitment years in terms of potentially floodplain, suitable floodplain habitat? So our study area is the lower Trinity River. We've separated into 3 zones, so I'll give you a zoom in on here in a moment. So the Google Earth or Landsat image on the right there, you can see the Houston metropolitan area, and our study reach runs from Lake Livingston down to Anahuac, Trinity Bay, basically. So just to zoom in each of those stretches, these zones were defined in consultation with colleagues at Parks and Wildlife, primarily Dave Buckmeyer, and this is to facilitate breaking up that large study area into a few sections, and also associated with how we access the river in some cases. So Zone 1 is between Lake Livingston and Highway 105, so you can see Highway 105 here. And what you'll note, just really coarsely looking at this image, is that you don't see a great deal of floodplain connectivity in terms of a large number of oxbows, side channels, bayous, etc. in this section. Zone 2 is between Highway 105 and Highway 90, so Highway 105 here, and Highway 90, this is Liberty. As you move downstream, you see an increase in the amount of off-channel habitats potentially connected, so a larger number of oxbows, bayous, and side channels, and so on. And then zone 3 is basically anything downstream of Highway 90. So again, Highway 90 and Liberty is here and downstream. And zone 3, like zone 2, has a large number of off-channel habitats, but is unique in terms of the extent of impact from oil and gas exploration and transport. So there's a large number of pipelines, pipeline right-of-ways, access roads to gas pads and so on, that when we zoom in later on in some imagery, you'll see almost a honeycomb in the floodplain at times of elevated roadways that are complicating access to or potentially movement around the floodplain during inundation. So those are our 3 zones. Within each of these zones, we have the same objectives, which is to model the potential spawning habitats that are available. And this work is expanding on the floodplain inundation model that was developed for the Gulf Coast plains and Ozarks LCC that Yvonne Allen's involved in. I'm not going to go into a lot of details because Jen will cover that. The next step is to then integrate floodplain inundation dynamics and the availability of those habitats to model alligator gar age structure using or model alligator gar recruitment using age structure data provided by colleagues at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Just to note that that data set is almost complete. I was speaking with Dave Buckmeyer a few days ago, and we should have the last few individuals cross-refed and double-checked in terms of age estimates in the next week or so, so we'll be able to jumpstart some of that work in the very near future. And validation of the above objectives is critically important, so we need to validate that our model accurately represents degree of floodplain inundation, extent, as well as the types of habitats that are inundated, as well as validating the suitability of spawning habitats, hopefully by collecting young of year alligator gar in those habitats. At the same time, it was important for the LCC that we made opportunistic observations of other taxa that might be utilizing the floodplain habitats while we were out there. So the bulk of today's webinar is going to be focused on that first objective, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Jen, if you can hear me, I think your microphone's muted.
Now it's unmuted. Hi, everyone. So I've been working on this part of the project with one of my graduate students, Killian Sterling, who's done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the GIS work to meet these project objectives. And I'll be saying next throughout because David has control of the PowerPoint. So next, please. Next, yeah. So our specific objectives here at Texas State for this portion of the project were to both do river stage specific floodplain or generate floodplain inundation GIS layers. And we use HEC-RAS to do that using a 1 meter LiDAR derived digital terrain model. That included the LiDAR processing and then the modeling in HEC-RAS. I'll talk about that and show you the results as well as address some of the uncertainties with those models. And then also generate river stage specific GIS layers that include Landsat-derived at-sensor brightness temperature and some of the uncertainties associated with that, and then how we reclassify Texas EMS land cover data to determine what suitable habitat is. Next. So in terms of the first objective there with the stage-specific floodplain inundation, just some background. The LiDAR data were separated into 2 different reaches initially. So there's Goodrich to Liberty, and it doesn't actually extend all the way up to Goodrich. It's from Romeyer, I apologize for that, to Liberty. And those LiDAR data were acquired in January 12th through the 26th in 2011. And then there's a separate model, the lower portion, which David characterized as Zone 3, and that's Liberty to Moss Bluff LiDAR data. And those were acquired 5 years earlier, and then in the spring early summer of 2006. These graphs here just are an idea of what the discharge looked like on the dates of the LiDAR acquisition between the bulk of the study area, Romeyer to Liberty. And it gives us an idea of, you could click next, please, David. It gives us an idea of what the channel elevation should have been at that time. So in terms of the LiDAR data, those were delivered as LAS files, and I interpolated them using a 1 meter DEM, using topo to raster to try and provide the most hydrologically correct terrain model. And then the next image is a zoomed in area of just how wonderful it is to work with this LiDAR data, although it takes a long time to process. So it does provide very accurate the characterization of minor variations in floodplain elevation. I want to point out in both this and the next image that the resulting DTMs were, the terrain models were hydrologically enforced to ensure downstream flow and also hydroconditioned to fill gaps and pits in the data. So tried to create the best terrain models possible. Next. And then next. So once we had these terrain models, the river geometry was digitized in ArcMap using HEC GeoRAS and then exported and edited edited the geometry in HEC-RAS 5. In terms of modeling floodplain inundation, we used upstream discharge and downstream gauge height that were specific to Landsat 2016 image acquisition dates. And we did that because we're incorporating temperature into our data sets in terms of the suitability modeling. So we wanted to know what the discharge was on those dates, 8 dates that Landsat data were acquired between May and August 2016. Next. So again, we have 8 different Landsat dates of imagery. And if David, if you could slowly cycle through, this first one is for May 6th, where the discharge coming out of Goodrich is 1,566 cubic meters. This next one he just showed was May 21st, June 6th, June 22nd, July 8th, July 24th, August 16th, or August 9th, and then finally August 25th. So there's some variation in discharge. We had some nice flooding, if you're not on the river. We had some nice flooding earlier in the spawning season. Next. So using the floodplain inundation layer, setting that aside for a moment, we also downloaded the Landsat 8 thermal scenes from the USGS and converted from brightness value to at sensor brightness temperature in degrees Celsius. Next. So normally with Landsat data, when we're working with thermal, we can just say relative, that's cooler or that's warmer, but with some simple radiometric equations, we can actually assign a specific temperature value to each. It's a 30-meter pixel, but the area on the ground that's actually sensed by the detectors is 60 meters on the ground. So it's resampled down to 30 meters. There were, however, this image that you see here with the inundation from May 5th overlaying on the thermal image where light tones are warmer and dark tones are cooler. This was the best image from 2016. So 1 out of those 8 dates was actually relatively clear of cloud cover, which presented a problem. Next. So again, the problem that we ran into, so this image is from June 22nd, 2016, and all of those dark areas are primarily heavy cloud cover, and that occurred throughout the entire scene, which wouldn't be a problem except when it occurs over the floodplain area of interest. So we also downloaded and used the Landsat surface reflectance dataset because it includes a cloud mask layer. So we wanted to mask the clouds out of the thermal data. Next. But that resulted in huge gaps over the floodplain where most of the images were void at that point of thermal infrared data exactly where we needed it. So we decided to use older imagery to fill those gaps caused by the clouds and the subsequent masking process. And we used a method it's a radiometric normalization method, usually intended to normalize atmospheric effects or minimize atmospheric effects between two image dates when you're conducting a change detection. It's called multi-day image normalization using regression, and we can't correct for the clouds, but we can try and gap fill the data using historic imagery. Essentially what that multi-day image normalization does is it takes a historic image and next please. You identify pseudo invariant features, so pixels representing land cover that shouldn't change spectrally over time or over sun angle. They're relatively constant in terms of reflectance. Then you form a regression where you form a regression where you're trying to use, say, 1998 data to simulate what 2016 data would have looked like. So we identify these pseudo-invariant features between the 2016 and those prior year images, built the regression models based on those selected pixels, and the results from those 8 different dates resulted in R-squares from 0.98 to 0.99, which is great. The RMSEs ranged from 0.15 degrees Celsius, and the maximum RMSE was 2.3 degrees Celsius. So there is some uncertainty in there in terms of the dates. We applied those models to the individual dates of historic imagery, again, to simulate what they would have been if it were 2016 and next. So we get a comprehensive map of what temperature should look like across the entire floodplain through the regression modeling. So now we had gap-free temperature data sets that we used in a GIS mode to start constructing the habitat suitability models. Next. The temperature data at that point were reclassified based on ranges provided by Buckmeyer, and he shared that with Killian in terms of what range would be acceptable, not too hot, not too cold. So 21, everything, all the pixels, 21.5 to 31 degrees Celsius, were reclassified with a value of 1, and all other pixels that were either cooler or warmer than that temperature range were classified as 0. And we did this as part of the image algebra process so we could identify and combine layers to get a final output. All the temperature data were clipped also at this point to the stage-specific inundation layer. So instead of working with the entire data set, we just wanted to know what's inundated and is in an appropriate or suitable temperature range. Next. So the final component of our suitability layers included the ecological mapping system data set. There were 92 different classes present within the 100-year floodplain. So Killian went through and the literature and identified through prior studies and other knowledge what suitable land cover classes would be included within, or vegetation types that would be included in suitable habitat class. And he reclassified all of these data as suitable and non-suitable. So a binary classification. Everything that was identified as suitable was coded with a 10, and everything unsuitable was coded with a 0. Next. So here's an example with a Google Earth image underneath. So everything in beige is identified as suitable habitat. This doesn't extend outside of the floodplain, but just an idea. There is some uncertainty associated with either the way we recoded land cover classes or the classification of the EMS, which there's always uncertainty with land cover layers. And there's also some change, potential change, for instance, in the north western corner there where the agricultural plots would be suitable but not necessarily classified as such. Next. So we combined all of those layers, and the reason we reclassified them was because anything that took on a value of 0 was inundated. Those are shown in black, so down towards the Moss Bluff area, just south there of Liberty. Those areas are black, they're inundated. Values that took on a, pixels that took on a value of 1 are shown in light blue. Those are inundated, but they only have suitable temperature. Values that took on, pixels that took on a value of 11 were inundated and they have suitable habitat, but the temperature isn't suitable. And then all of those areas in pixels and areas in red were both inundated, had suitable temperature, and suitable habitat. So I want you to focus on the areas, again, in red in terms of what we identified through our processing as suitable spawning habitat. So this image here is from May 5th, 2016. The next image shows a zoomed in area. So there at the bottom right corner of that image, that's Liberty. And then as you move up towards the north, that's the Dayton Lakes area. The next image will show the same thing. So this is May 21st, 2016. Not as high of a discharge, but we still see a lot of potential habitat, again, around Liberty, the bulk of it actually, around just to the west of Liberty and around the Dayton Lakes area, a little bit towards Moss Bluff next. So even at lower flows, what, 1/3 of the flow, no, yeah, 1/3 of the flow, we get, again, just west of Liberty, suitable habitat, and then in some of the oxbows and off-channel areas, there's pockets of suitable habitat. Next, thanks. So June 6, 2016, this is a interesting suitability layer. This happens to be, if you'll notice that in those black pixels, all of those areas are inundated, but it indicates that neither the temperature nor the habitat is suitable. So this image specifically had that root mean square error of the regression of 2 degrees Celsius. What we haven't done at this point is incorporated those uncertainties into the temperature layer. So I suspect that's what's going on here is we need to actually go back and look at, are those areas just 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius off in terms of the temperature, because that would open up some more suitability layers. Next. So again, okay, so can you go to the next one? Oh, go back, please. I don't have zoom in layers on these, but this is June 22nd, 2016. Again, relatively high flows. More inundated and suitable habitat areas. The next image is July 8th. The flows down again. Again, right there near Liberty, you have a lot of potential habitat suitability. The next is July 24th. Things are starting to wind down. August 9th is the next image. Nope, that's a zoom in. So this is just above Dayton Lakes. Some of these off-channel oxbows here. Definitely some suitable habitat, even though the flow is relatively low at 48 cubic meters per second coming out of Goodrich. And then the final image is August 25th. Again, lower flows, but still some suitable habitat available. So we do have, as I've mentioned, some uncertainties in the analysis. One of the uncertainties that we're addressing right now is the inundation models, and we're revising them based primarily on some conversations I've had with Yvonne Allen, and she has compared 10,000 CFS increments inundation layers with her inundation index, and it appears that in the top portion of my modeling from the Goodrich down to Liberty area, what happens is my models are inundating more frequently than her inundation index based on Landsat analysis suggests they should. So one of the challenges with running that model from Goodrich to Liberty was that at Romeyer we run out of LiDAR data. So I used resampled 10-meter USGS data to finish the terrain models, the elevation model up to that area. Instead, what we're doing is constructing the river geometry from Romeyer to Liberty, where it's only LiDAR data, and then using the Goodrich to Romeyer model using just the USGS data. So we're not mixing resolutions or acquisition dates. Next. Again, there is some uncertainty with the temperature data and the modeling. We had low RMSEs, but an analysis of looking through different image pixels that we've sampled, some of them exhibit larger errors, so up to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius within the floodplain. So we do need to incorporate some sensitivity or uncertainty analysis in the temperature layer data set, and then incorporate that. So next. And then the EMS land cover reclassification. We have done our best as geographers working with remote sensing and GIS to identify all the potential land covers and account for them. However, we are not experts, Killian nor I, are experts in Alligator Gar or their ecology. So we really would appreciate expert input in terms of if provided a list of land covers, are there some that we need to exclude or some that we've erroneously excluded? Next. Our continuing work is the Landsat-based inundation validation of HECRAS model floodplain inundation. So in addition to working with the data sets and comparisons that Yvonne Allen has done, we also are tasked with using Landsat to validate the stage-specific inundation. We'll have to use historical imagery, acquired historical imagery for discharges that are as close to the observed 2016 discharges as possible, and we are working on developing an image database so we can facilitate that. Other continuing work is the habitat suitability gradient approach. So we simply have a binary classification of suitable habitat, not suitable habitat. But to provide more guidance, especially for management or field work, and where to go to look for spawning habitat for year of young, we would appreciate some input in terms of identifying best habitat, good habitat, fair habitat, and poor habitat. So we could, again, provide a gradient approach with that. Next. It's your turn, David.
All right, thanks, Jim. So my team has been working to do a lot of the field validation, both in terms of some small-scale validation of floodplain inundation, as well as trying to collect young of year alligator gar in flooded habitats. So I have a couple images here, just kind of give you an idea of how we do it. So the top left that shows our boat that's probably a little bit too small for being on a raging river, but it's small enough that we can get back into really isolated floodplain habitats. So it's a shallow draft, surface drive, Go Devil. It's not shown in this picture, but we also use a small battery-powered trolling motor when we're sampling rather than paddling. So we use this boat to go into flooded habitats and do visual surveys. We also can launch the drone from that boat to do aerial observations of habitats that are inundated, potential connections for us to access. Hopefully at some point we might get lucky enough to observe spawning activity. The hydrograph is showing the gauge height at Liberty, so the Highway 90 bridge for 2015 and 2016. So in the late summer and fall of 2015, we did a few reconnaissance trips to identify access points to get an idea for how the system responds in terms of increasing flows. So the green arrows are drone flights that were conducted and other types of reconnaissance, and then the red triangles are actually field sampling for young of year during 2016. Unfortunately, we don't have drone data for 2016 because the software was updated and lost back compatibility, and basically our drone flew away and was not replaced by the company until late in the spring of 2016. So we'll be doing more of those observations this year. So I'll just give you kind of an overview of some of our procedures and mention a few kind of initial findings, and then shift into kind of what's next. I would also note, while I have this hydrograph up here, that we had a lot of water in 2016, but if you look at it, it looks like a saw edge, you know, a sawtooth edge. It's very up and down and dynamic. So comparing that with the previous year, I think when we start looking at some of our modeling, these aspects, not just of the amount of habitat that's available at certain times during the spawning season, but maybe the preceding flow conditions in terms of rate of change, previous flows or floods prior to the spawning season will end up being important as well. So our field methods are based on work that others have done and shown to be effective. So similar groups in other areas. I use visual surveys and dip netting with fine mesh dip net from our boat, sometimes by foot in certain types of habitats. This is the same protocol as being used on the middle Trinity right now by colleagues at Parks and Wildlife. We went ahead and preserved all the young of year that were captured in ethanol. As Ben mentioned at the beginning, or maybe that was just in our conversations, one of the difficulties when you're catching individuals that are on the order of 20 to 30 millimeters is correct identification. So we went ahead and preserved individuals in ethanol so that we can do a genetic workup later for validation. At every location that we collectively measure water temperature, dissolved oxygen, depth, and so on, and also we take photographs of the corresponding habitats. We also take photographs from the main channel as we're moving down the river or moving between different sampling locations, so that we can help kind of validate some of the work that Jen's doing in terms of floodplain inundation and access points. While we're doing that, we also make opportunistic observations. So, for example, one of the few species that surprised me was we saw a river otter. Other species or taxa that we focused on, we made a lot of notes about different bird species utilized in the floodplain, especially in early spring 2016. And of course, there's American alligator all over the place. Some of these images just give you an idea of some of the habitats that we're sampling. So the habitat classifications that Jen mentioned, you can see here. So one of the types of habitats that we found to be that had the highest number of young of year that we collected was this partially submerged water willow. But we sampled any type of habitat. We also sampled drift in addition to marginal vegetation, and even when there was partially submerged vegetation away from the margins, we sampled that as well. Our field sampling trips typically lasted 2 to 3 days, so we spent an entire day working each of those 3 zones I mentioned previously. So from 6 sampling trips, each of which lasted 2 to 3 days, during 2016 we collected 13 young of year. I'm not going to say they're alligator gar, as we haven't done the genetic workup yet. Most of them are probably not. But we got 13 young of year. The first individual was collected on April 9th, and the last on June 11th. While we were out there, we saw a large number of large adult alligator gar. We did not observe any kind of spawning behavior, pairing, etc. In many cases that we went to habitats that we thought would be perfect conditions for spawning at the right time of year. We found no young of year. So this image here, for example, is a kind of sloping ranch land that's next to Menard Creek that has a few small little drainages that go into Menard Creek. We expected to find some young of year there, and we were surprised that we didn't. All individuals are measured, photographed in the field, and also preserved and subsequently photographed for dorsal and lateral views. So one of the things that we are doing to try to validate the floodplain inundation models at a small scale or a fine scale, and also to help us do reconnaissance in terms of identifying where to go while in the floodplain or habitats to potentially sample. And like I said, if we get lucky, maybe observe spawning behavior, is set up a drone and record video or take pictures. So we use a DJI Phantom 3 Pro. It has a gimbal mounted 4K HD camera with 12 megapixel photos. It's GPS enabled, so we can generate flight paths and plans, so we can log specific location for all of our imagery. So just a reminder, the 2 dates where we have data for at the moment are kind of in the summer and in the fall 2015. I'm going to click on a couple of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just a couple to give you kind of an idea of some of the types of information that this is useful for. I'll just skip that first one for the sake of time. Hopefully this works well. So I'm going to jump ahead to about close to the 3-minute mark here. We can edit these down, but one of the issues is trying to identify habitats that are inundated or not when you have this dense kind of hardwood forest. And so getting this reflectance, as you can see here, is a good indication that this is flooded at this particular river stage, whereas some areas here are clearly not, right? So this type of aerial imagery can be useful to validate some of the finer scale aspects of GEN's modeling efforts. This video I'll show you now from Port of Liberty. This is going to show, you have to bear with, the driver was getting accustomed here. So this is the Trinity River main stem swinging around to the east and now north. This is the Port of Liberty, just south of Highway 90. And if I pause for a moment, this is Gar Cove. This is the Highway 90 bridge and railroad bridge. So Gar Cove, this little kind of embayment here, it's always connected, at least all times that we were on the river is connected. This is the location where we caught most of our young of year. I've had some discussion with collaborators on the project and other colleagues at AFS earlier this year about whether that's actually a suitable spawning habitat or whether it's being deposited by strong flows, coming down this little bend here. We'll come back to this section in a moment. I'll skip ahead. This area over here is that large red or highly suitable habitat that Jen showed in her model that had both suitable habitat and temperature. So I'll just jump ahead to, I think it's the 2-minute mark here, kind of give you an idea. So when the camera pans up, at this point the driver was just looking for access points. These are examples of how the road can bisect and kind of honeycomb the floodplain, but as the sun kind of gets out of your eyes there. So this is that large habitat or large location that was identified as suitable spawning habitat based on temperature and land cover class. We have not been able to get access into here just yet. We're still working on it. One of the issues is the highway gets water up the edge. It's really difficult to drop a boat off. So I think this spring we've done that, we're probably going to take kayaks and then just go back in here with kayaks instead. I'm going to jump down to just this one last video here, just for the sake of time. Those are my guys. Let me see what I wanted to show with this video is we can identify, we can model potentially suitable habitat based on the land cover, based on the temperature, and if it's flooded at certain flood stages. One of the things that I'm interested in is how these roadways that traverse the floodplain, either for access to homes, gas pads, pump jacks, right-of-ways for oil and gas exploration, whatever it might be, as this starts to zoom up a little higher, you'll see that it becomes this honeycomb where it's very difficult to access this, not just for us, but I expect also for Gar. So we might find some habitats that, or some locations that appear to be suitable habitats based on the type of land cover and temperature at a flood stage, but is it accessible, or, to be really suitable? So that's one of the things that I've been thinking about from spending a significant amount of time in this system, and I would look forward to getting some feedback from some of the folks on the webinar about whether or not we think that Alligator Gar might be able to traverse a highly complex honeycomb-like pattern where it's almost like a maze to get to that just right habitat wherever it may be. For example, some of this area may flood and be classified as suitable, but is it truly accessible? All right, so what's next? As Jim mentioned, continue developing the inundation models. We'll have another field season this year, doing more field validation of flood extent as well as spawning. After we have the inundation models and habitat suitability models dialed in, we'll combine those with flow attributes such as rate of change, duration of flooding, number of breaks or pulses, and use those data to model recruitment based on the age structure data provided by colleagues at Parks and Wildlife. Either later this spring or at the completion of our field work, we'll likely sequence our individuals. We can either do that in-house here. Talking with a colleague who can work with us to sequence those individuals, or I know that Dave Buckmeyer has been sending samples to Brian Kaiser at Southern Miss, so that might be an option as well. And just in case folks are interested, as part of this project and through interactions with folks at Texas Parks and Wildlife, we've developed a few side projects that are potentially related or of interest to the LCC, so I wanted to mention them here. So while the Parks and Wildlife crew were collecting individuals to estimate age and growth, obviously they had to sacrifice individuals to take the OLIS. We stored samples or obtained samples to quantify mercury content in white mussel, liver, and eggs. We'll also run stable carbon and nitrogen isotope analyses on those. We have a new isotope ratio mass spectrometer in my lab here at UNT, so we can knock those out this summer as well. And we're going to be quantifying lipid content in eggs as a metric of egg quality as well. So we have a lot of different lines of research that have kind of spawned out of this collaborative project, all focused on ecology of Alligator Gar and potential management implications as well. Just note that we'll be presenting again later this year at AFS, so hopefully we'll have some more kind of final products to share with folks in the Gar Symposium in August. So with that, again, just a big thank you to the GCP LCC and as well as our colleagues at Parks and Wildlife who've been instrumental in helping us develop this work, and I hope we have some time to get some questions and some helpful discussion as we move forward.
Thank you, David and Jen. This has been Kaler. Quite a phenomenal amount of work, both behind a computer and in the boat and in the water here. I know we've got about 10 minutes left on the hour, so we're going to open it up for some open discussion among folks. And before we do that, we've got one more poll question here that I'd like to launch. Here we go. So based on what you heard and saw today, in what format would you prefer to get results from this project? You know that this is a very, very technical project, a lot of different modeling products, as well as, you know, just the information about habitat connectivity or potential connectivity and what that might mean for managing gar populations in the lower Trinity. So for the folks on the phone, what kind of information would you be looking for when this project is wrapped up? We've got about 60%, 65% voted. Thank you. Most people have voted now. If we can see some results here, Greg. Surprisingly, peer-reviewed journal articles, technical reports. I mean, obviously, a lot of different methodologies used to combine these different in the field and computer technology. So and methods. So that's interesting. And I don't see any questions in the chat box right now. Let's see.
People can also use the hand raise function, the button, and we can just call on them and unmute them.
Stuart Marcus has got his hand up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, just a question. I'm the manager of the Trinity River National Wildlife Refuge, and never did hear the refuge mentioned because we own about 30,000 acres up and down the floodplain between Romare and below Highway 90. We have no water. I don't want to say water rights, but we don't have any water rights, but we have no water control. But we do have areas that are protected, and it would, on some of your maps, it would have been nice to see an overlay of the wildlife refuge to show what where those areas that are have highest potential might be already part of the National Wildlife Refuge system.
Yeah, it might be nice to take a look at that. I know that it seems like the modeling's still ongoing, and from what I recall, Jennifer, you mentioned that wanted to incorporate some of the uncertainty and some of those habitat suitability models. It's kind of still midstream, but at some point, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to try to look at where publicly managed areas kind of overlap with areas that are coming up as both suitable for temperature and habitat.
We could also offer you the opportunity to do some research out here on the refuge. We probably will not allow drones, but any of the other type of work would be allowed.
I've got a question for you, David and Jennifer. So without, you know, a lot of more further field validation or efforts, it appears that in the lower Trinity, your habitat might be limiting for Gar, just based on, you know, where the connectivity of the inundated and suitable for temperature and habitat are. Do you have any thoughts on that, as far as how seemingly suitable habitat is aggregated across that lower Trinity? Y'all on mute.
Okay, thanks. I was muted also. So first, with the first question, actually, with the Trinity River National Wildlife Refuge, that is part of our task set. Actually, is to quantify and characterize where suitable habitat occurs within different land ownership or land management areas. So that's part of the process that Killian's still working on for his research component, and that'll be forthcoming. It's not a hard GIS task to accomplish, but you're right, that would have been nice to include that in the map, and I didn't, and I apologize And if, Ben, you had asked, can you ask your question again? I was focused on being muted.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, without further field validation efforts, through this project, it is tempting to think that habitat is limited, for Gar in the lower Trinity based on, say, the aggregation and distribution of habitats that are inundated and are suitable temperature and habitat-wise. And I'm wondering, at this early stage, if you don't have any thoughts on the just how during different stages of the river, how those, it seems like there's some solid pockets of habitat regardless of water level on the end. There's some wide space between some of those pockets.
Well, my initial thought is just how we're specifying what is suitable and unsuitable habitat. So pretty much anything that's open canopy is identified as suitable. And then the bulk of that area between Romeyer and Trinity is closed canopy forest, so that's just automatically not considered suitable. That's why it would be nice to take a gradient approach to levels of potential suitability, because I think it would open up and reveal a different spatial pattern on the landscape in terms of suitable habitat. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it gets to it. It seems like based on where the modeling products are right now, there seems to be a few patches, a few large patches of inundated and have the temperature range and the habitat characteristics that make it stand out as red, right? The larger red block. And there's a lot of distance on the ground between those. But it looked like there was in the blue space on the maps, looked like there was a lot of areas that were inundated and had, that temperature.
Right.
But I think what you're getting at is that they're considered closed canopy forests, and that's why they're still popping out in that blue color.
Yeah, because it's inundated temperature suitable, but we've identified it as unsuitable habitat. So again, potentially it could be suitable habitat, but without, I feel strongly, without more expert opinion on, can you have 50% canopy cover and can it still be suitable habitat? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we're focused primarily on open canopy based on the literature and the land covers that have been identified in the peer-reviewed documents.
Okay.
Ben, I wanted to mention that Yvonne has her hand up. She might be able to shed some light on this question. You want me to unmute her?
Can I respond real fast to the first two? I would just respond to Stuart and say, when we were in the field, we tried very hard to get onto some of those backwater areas. The two oxbows just north of Highway 90 on the Trinity Refuge lands only connect at really high water levels. So we haven't been able to access those except for extreme flooding. We did go through and sample there, but they actually are quite deep, with very limited, what we would consider to be appropriate habitat. But we did work through there. It was just an oversight for the sake of time, not to spend specifics on it. And similarly, Menard Creek, alongside Menard Creek, is basically an extension of the Big Thicket, and that's an area that is also adjacent to a large tract of farmland that has some lower lying areas that flood. And a couple of the landowners who we've interacted with have told us that during their lifetime, and they must be in their 90s, late 80s or 90s, that they have repeatedly seen large alligator gar spawning on their ranch land. So we are very much aware and paying attention to those type of habitats and those types of habitats that might be suitable that are adjacent to them. And I would echo all of Jen's comments about the habitat suitability, and that's exactly why we're trying to move to a gradient approach. And I would also say that those images can be somewhat deceiving because of scale. This is a very large area that we're working with. And it's even larger when you get down on the water. So Even if it does seem like there's very small pockets, I agree. Those actually might still be significant within the overall landscape.
Okay. Well, thanks. I know Yvonne's got her hand up, and so does Stuart. So Yvonne, I'm going to unmute you if you have any comments, and then Stuart, I'll let you close it out if you still have anything left. Yvonne.
Hello. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
Cool. This is good. I like the way this is going. It sounds like, you know, we're starting to see some results from merging these two kind of approaches, and I imagine that's what you're going to be going for in the near future. There was one question that I had, and that probably Jen has too, is were you all able to do any, and they're kind of all interrelated, were you able to do any ground truthing underneath the temperature data, and specifically under the tree canopy?
We do have temperature data from locations where we sampled. I need to basically get those GPS coordinates and temperature data and dates and ship them to Jen so she can see if they jive, or she can send me the layers to see how well they correspond. But yes, we do have. It's obviously not comprehensive. We didn't drive across, do transects measuring temperature, but everywhere that we sampled, we have temperature data.
Cool. That's good. That's going to be very helpful, and that'll help to kind of address this question, this nagging question of what is the value of woody wetlands, basically, that are forested, that Jen was mentioning, and that, you know, I know that's a super difficult habitat to access and sample, but you know, if we can, it's very important whether we need to be excluding that or not. And temperature is one of those things that, you know, under the tree canopy you get a lot reduced temperature even in the summertime. I did have one thought about the connectivity aspect of it. I've done, and I think that Jen with her layers could do a similar thing. I've used the inundation index and use that as a cost surface to estimate connectivity with, you know, whatever your starting point is. I did it with the main stem, main channel rivers, and so that could be used to get at some of the questions of connectivity that you had, because we had similar questions. Like there's some, you know, obviously very isolated areas that like probably those oxbows that don't get connected. That could be. Those could be really well identified using that cost surface approach. So,
yeah, and you're referring to the layer you emailed me showing the easily accessed or connected backwater habitat with high temp that was kind of protected from the cool waters flooding in from the channel.
Right. Yeah. That kind of.
I have not forgotten about that. That's stuck in the back of my mind.
Yeah. That could be easily replicated using the HEC-RAS layers too. So that would be good. Yeah. Other than that, I'll defer to. I have a couple other, you know, detailed kind of questions, but I'll just defer to the next person.
All right. So we have two people with their hands up. Stuart, Marcus, you still have your hand up. You have anything else? Any other questions you want to ask?
No, I think everything is fine. Just remember, use us. We're available. We're here. We could use you guys, your research, your expertise. We'd like to be the Alligator Gar capital of Liberty County, so let us know.
Fantastic.
Will do. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And last person is Kayla Kimmel. Kayla, I've unmuted you if you have any comments or questions. All right, last call for Kayla Kimmel. All right, well, we are past the hour. I really want to thank both David and Jen for presenting this update for us. And these are kind of not traditionally how we do things, kind of midstream, but with such a complicated and diverse partnership of PIs, it's nice to get an update on a project like this, so diverse. So I really appreciate the time and thoughtful consideration you put into this, and thanks for everyone who stuck through it. We'll be offering another webinar the first Wednesday of next month. If you're interested in monarch conservation and how the South, Texas, and Oklahoma fits in with conservation across North America, tune in then. Look for the invite. But otherwise, I want to wish you guys a happy rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.